Hello, today we're having a look at Lab 1. So, this is all about functions. Calling them helper functions, but it's just functions. Helper functions being the idea that these might be helpful functions to your productivity. So, this is a supplement to the PowerPoint, I guess. This is just going to be some hands-on experience with something that I didn't spend a ton of time on. Functions are weird because you definitely spent bunch of time on them in introduction to programming class, but I haven't actually gone over them with you in a while. So this lab is designed to get you some experience with those. So you've got some instructions that look something like this. So we're going to create some helper functions, and I'll read through this. I think I'm going to spend more time talking about the general structure of this than doing the assignment. That's not true, but it's going to be weighted a little differently than what I would have thought. But I think talking about this is the more important thing here. So I'm going to ask you to create several helper functions. Detailed specifications of the functions are down here. So if you want to know what, string hello, what the function called hello is supposed to do, well, that's everything you need to know about it. I have included some test cases that your functions need to pass. You will understand that soon enough. Points for this lab are going to be distributed like this. So passing the test cases, I'm going to give you 80% of the points, and documenting your functions, I'm going to give you 20%. So if your functions are not documented well, the best you could get on this is 80%. So don't blow off that part. So for documentation, here's what you should do. And so you could just not even have a functional function. I don't know if saying that is the right thing or not. You could have a function that doesn't do anything. And if you had documentation on it, you get 20%. I guess that's the upside. So for every function, I'd like you to explain what the function does, which is kind of weird because I know I'm explaining it to you here, but I'm trying to get you in the habit of it. Explain the types of the parameters. So if there's multiple parameters, this is going to be multiple statements. If there's no parameters, you're going to say there's no parameters. Talk about the return type. So if there's a return type, say this returns Boolean or integer or string. If it doesn't return anything, you could say that. The term for that is a void function. And anything else that might be usable. Some functions are complicated, some are not. So this is the judgment part. But if you tell me what your function is, tell me about the parameters, tell me about the return value, and what, you accurately describe what it does, then there's those points. This is a lab, so I'm going to be doing it for you. I mean, not for you, but with you, so there's no reason this should be bad. So we're going to create several functions. One's going to be called hello. Function called hello. Oh, I guess let's talk about how to read this. This is what I call a function header. My first job as a programmer, I would just get a worksheet or a sheet of paper or multiple sheets of paper every day, and all I would have was, they would give me like that and that and that. The idea being you need to learn how to read that. So that thing that precedes the parentheses, that's the name of the function. If someone asks you to create a function, you have to name it exactly the way that they say to name it because they're going to call it. The parentheses, what's inside of those parentheses, that tells you about the parameters. Notice that there's nothing in there, so that means that function has no parameters. That data type in front of the name of the function, that is telling you what kind of a value this function returns. So this is a function called hello that returns a string, and it has no parameters. And you see, function returns a string and has no parameters. So there's that. And then this part right here is telling you what it actually does. So this is a function where you call it, you don't pass it anything, and it gives you back a string, hello world. The next one up is a function called +6. It has a single parameter of type integer. Now, in an interpreted language like PHP, I don't know what the point of differentiating between an integer and like a float is, but my idea is that this is an integer. But, we're not going to run into any type issues with that. And this thing returns an integer. This function adds 6 to a number. So if you pass this thing a 7, it's going to add a 6 to it. That's what it does. Returns an integer, has one parameter of type integer. The return value is 6 greater than the parameter, or the argument, I don't know what we should call it here. We're not going to verify that we were passing an integer. So if you pass this thing a string, well, I think it'll probably just return 6. But, that's the kind of thing that a good function would maybe verify that the data types are right. But I don't know, I'm not saying we need to do that here. I'm not trying to get too far into the weeds. But that's the kind of thing that you would want to note with a function, is that this thing's going to do something crazy if you pass it an array or something like that. Next one up is called proper. You pass it a string, and it returns a string. What it does is it formats a string as a proper noun. If you don't know what a proper noun is a word that starts with an uppercase letter, and all the rest is lowercase, like a first name or a last name or the name of a thing. Person, place, or thing? I don't know. Something like that. Valid email is the next one. So that's the name of the function. You pass it a string. It returns a Boolean. Right? People oftentimes get into these kind of... they create generalizations like, integer, string. Oftentimes, the parameter and the return type are the same because, I don't know, sometimes it is. If it's a string function, it's probably going to do something, return a string. But a lot of strings functions are Boolean. So this one returns true or false based on whether the email looks like a valid email. So what the heck is a valid email? Well, defining what a valid email is super difficult. There's some crazy regular expressions for it. But we're just going to do the pretty simple thing. We're going to say this returns true if the argument contains an at and a dot, and the dot needs to come after the at. That is not, there's more to a valid email than that, but that's the simplest way that I think you can pick out complete garbage. You could do better. Useful functions here are going to be string position and string strip. I don't know, right? I'm saying what I think they stand for. Those are the functions that you can use to make this easy. On the previous ones, strip to lower and use words was helpful. So I'm giving you the functions that you might want to use to do these tasks. It's also, the interesting thing about writing functions is I could care less how you write these functions. If your function is 500 lines, I don't know, I don't really care. All I care is that it passes the tests and it does what it's supposed to do. So I'm going to do things the way I'm going to do them, but if you want to do them another way, that'd be great. Next one, print Key Val. You pass this an array, and it's a void function, meaning it doesn't return anything. It just does something. So this function echoes the contents of an array's key value pairs. The key value pairs are separated by line breaks. And arrays are to list. So this function here is called are to list. You pass it an array, and it returns a string. So basically, you take an array, and it turns that into a string that is actually formatted as an unformatted list. So an HTML list, right? So a set of UL tags where each one of the key value pairs is inside of LI tags. If that's not super clear to you, well, that's why I'm doing a solution to this, so I'm not too worried about it. But in the real world, if someone asked you to write a function and you were not sure about what it was supposed to do, you for sure should just contact the person and make sure that you understand what the expectation is. I'm sitting here trying to make this fit on one page and also clearly communicate to you what I think these things should do. If you don't know what you need to do as a programmer, it's not going to go well. You're probably going to end up wasting a ton of time, and you're not going to meet people's expectations. So if any of this is unclear to you, then just reach out to me or whoever the heck is asking you to do the thing. If you're writing functions for yourself, those are not problems that really exist. But if you are creating functions for someone else, make sure that you understand what you're doing first. We're doing a lab, so it's kind of moot here, but please understand that idea. All right, so that's what you need to know about the functions. I wanted to sit here and spend a bunch of time talking about these function headers because it's an important idea, is to be able to read that and interpret that and understand what that means. And no one's particularly concerned about the inside of your function or how you implement it, just so long as it returns what it's supposed to return, accepts what it's supposed to accept, and is named what it's supposed to be named. The rest is up to you. So I spent a lot of time talking about that, as I expected I would. Let's talk about what this looks like for you. So that was that. This right here, so you're going to need to download this and put it in your htdocs folder. I'd create a week 1 folder probably or something, or 233p week 1 folder. I don't know how you're structuring your files, but things are going to be a huge mess by the time we're all done. So I'll probably put it in a folder somewhere. When you get that thing, it's going to look like this. So the first thing this thing does is it requires something called lab1 helpers. It is your job to create a file called lab1helpers.php. If you create some file not called lab1helpers.php, well, then this require is going to fail and it's going to go nowhere. So the first time you try and run this, it's going to crash and it's going to say failed require, can't find lab1 helpers. So you just got to create lab1 helpers. Here's my lab1 helpers. And it needs to be in the same directory, as you can see, because the path is written like that, which means it's relative to where it's at. Beyond that, I created a function, an array for you, because there's some array stuff going on. Don't worry about it. I'm just giving this to you. And these are our test cases down here. So first thing it does is it tests that function called hello. And here's a little if-else statement. It's going to produce a... So basically, here's a call to the function. If what that thing returns matches that, then it's going to say pass. Otherwise, it's going to say fail. So notice I'm calling this function. It's your job to write that function. So it's your job to create that file with that name and to create a function called hello. And it either returns exactly that or it doesn't. And that's what means it's going to pass or fail. So when you run this, so when you're done, it's going to do something like this. It's going to say testing hello, pass, testing +6, pass, 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 pass. And then you get down to some functions that I can't test for you. You see those tests were simple when it's like pass it a 6 and hopefully you get back a 12, or call hello and hopefully you get back hello world. But when you pass it an array and it gives you back a list, I can't really test that for you. I'm telling you to just eyeball it and see if it looks like a list. But that's what it'll look like when you're done. When you're just starting, it does that. So, testing hello, fatal error. So it says something about undefined function hello, which means it's calling a function hello right here, and I can't find it. So what we need to do is create a function called hello. So that's going to be function hello. It had no arguments, so it looks something like that. I always comment out the closing curly brace on a function because there's very often going to be like a loop or an if in there, and you're going to have multiple sets of curly braces. Let's document this thing first. So I do a lot of single line comments, but this is probably a good time for block comments. Well, I don't know if you can do a one line, fine. But let's document this function. So returns the string hello world. Return. See, this one's so simple. I struggle to document this one because I'm kind of saying it returns a string, but let's just try and do the best we can. Be clear. I'm sure that when you go into the real world, people look at your code, being verbose with your documentation, your functions is a benefit. So no parameters. Returns a string. I really like to separate those into two lines actually, so you're explicitly talking about what it does and just easy to read. It's weird when you're doing something so trivial, but the alternative is we do things that are complicated, and then that's weird because you're having a hard time following that as well. So like I said, this thing just returns a string called hello world, or of value hello world. So that means we're going to write a return statement. That's it. And I think that should be it. So now I can go over here to lab 1, save this, head on over here, I refresh this, and this error should go away because there now is a function called hello, and it passed. And then I go testing +6, and guess what? There's no function called +6. So the test case exists, but the function itself doesn't exist, so we have to deal with that. Let me circle back one more time and look at, let's talk about function headers one more time. So notice when I write these function headers, I explicitly declare the type of the return value right there. But notice in PHP, we are not required to define the return value. In some languages you are, in some languages you're not. But when we're talking about function headers, this is the best way for me to communicate to you that it does, in fact, return a string or an integer or a string. And just I'm pointing that out because, and you also, related, when I say this accepts an int, you don't have to declare any of the types here. And so it's a little weird right? Like this thing returns a string, but I don't have to write string here. In a lot of languages, like C-type languages, you do have to return or declare the return type there, but you notice in PHP we don't have to do that because the whole idea of data types, we don't have to deal with it much because it's interpreted language. So just trying to make that connection here. All right. Next up is +6. I don't think it's a bad idea to copy and paste that because there's, actually, I don't know. Because I'm defining exactly that function. I don't know, maybe it's a bad idea to copy paste all the time. I don't know. So I shell my stuff out. I always try and put my structure together first. Let's write the documentation first. All right, so this adds 6 to a number. Oh, this thing is going to have a parameter. I usually call them like parameter 1 is a number. I'll say number. You know, it's when I wrote the documentation, I said integer, but I know we're not going to enforce it, so I'll just say it's a number. And returns a number. If you want to say an integer, I think that'd be fine. So let's create that parameter. Now me, we could call it anything, right? I could call it, well, that actually probably wouldn't work because there's a semicolon in it. Well, you can't name your variables anything, but you can name them pretty close to anything. I'm a fan of naming my variables the type that I'm expecting. In many languages, you explicitly specify the type of the parameter, but here I'm just going to say int, like the idea being, hey, this thing is an integer. I don't know, you can call it what you want. This is another super easy one. It's going to be return int +6. That's what it does, right? Whatever you pass it, it adds 6 to it and it returns it. Let's test it out. I save it. Head on over here, refresh, and I passed. Now we're on proper, and no function called proper. Proper, this is a hard one, actually. Well, all right. So we've now reached the point where this could be difficult or not difficult. So we've messed around with these kind of things in Introduction to PHP. We can treat these things kind of like we could rip this apart and convert all the... So here's the idea. The first character needs to be uppercase and all the rest need to be lowercase. That sounds a little easier than it is, but in reality you have to deal with this situation where someone could do things in like a weird mixed case, and you don't know that the first letter is not already uppercase, and you don't know that anything after that's not lowercase. So what we're going to go with here is we're going to turn the whole string to lowercase, and then we're just going to grab the first letter and put it in uppercase. And there's many ways you could do that. I'm just going to do it a way. So the function we're going for here is called proper. Function proper. You see, I flesh them out later. And block comments. Formats a string as a proper noun. Param1 is a string. Returns a string. Something like that. You see, there's just simple functions. So it feels weird to do this, but I'm telling you it's a good idea. I mean, that's not... The fact that it's not difficult is good. So let's define that parameter. I'll call it str. I'm expecting it to be a string. So we could probably do this in one line, but in the interest of trying to make it easier to follow, I'm going to do it in 2 lines. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take that parameter and I'm going to all right, so this is going to be 2 steps. There's a function called str to lower. What it does is it makes a string lowercase. There's also str to upper. And the thing that I want to turn to lowercase is this thing called string. And I'm going to do the old assignment statement. So I'm saying, hey, string is now assigned the value of what it was as a lowercase. If it was already lowercase, well, I guess we just wasted our time. If it had any capitals in it, it doesn't anymore. So now I've reassigned string the value of itself in a lowercase format. And now, so what we need to do is capitalize the first letter of the word. There's a lot of ways we could do that. Like we could kind of rip the string apart and concatenate it back together, or I could just tell you that there is a function which does that already, and it's called UCWords. UCWords does exactly what we want it to do. Now you might be wondering, why didn't we just go straight to UCWords? Well, because that would have only dealt with the first letter of the word. We still had to go in there and make the rest of it lowercase. There's other ways you could do this. Maybe, probably more straightforward ways. Definitely cooler ways we could have done this, but I don't know, that's the easiest way to do it. Notice I'm not trying to get too bogged down in the what in the heck, how are we doing what we're doing in the functions. I'm more concerned about defining functions according to the specifications, documenting those functions, and understanding the idea of passing some tests. So that one was more complicated. So I had 2 tests for it. I passed both of those. Now we're on to valid email. Yeah, these get harder. The first 2 were pretty easy, and that one was harder. This one's a little harder. This one I am not looking forward to doing, just because it's not going to look pretty. Just because it's kind of complicated. What's going on here? So first thing we'll do is document the function. All right. Evaluates whether an email, a string looks like an email. A well-formatted. All right. Happy with that. Param1 is a string. Returns Boolean. Now, in a Boolean, it's probably kind of intuitive, but I will say true equals looks like an email. False. False does not look like an email. And I should also probably document my methodology here. So, explain well-formatted. Well-formatted has an at and a dot occurring after the at. That's what I'm saying this one. I'm not looking forward to writing it because it's a weird sentence to write, and writing it in code is not going to be any prettier. So this thing accepts the string. So how the heck do I write what I just said? Well, this actually can be done in one line, and that's kind of how I like to do this. But I know that it's not the best demonstration. So since this is a Boolean, that means we're going to have an if in here. Oh, actually, let me comment out that closing. All right. So since this goes one of 2 directions, that means it's going to have an if. So that's my if. So if what? All right. So here's the deal. We're looking for an at, and we're looking for a dot. It's got to have both of them, but there's the additional weird thing that the dot has to come after the at. So in other words, like ken.swart at stuff, that's not a valid email. That's definitely not going to be a valid email because there has to be a dot over here. There may or may not be dots over here. I don't actually care because I can't tell you whether there should or shouldn't be, but there does have to be a dot over here. I mean, technically, you could say things like it can't end in a dot, but you know perfectly well I'm not trying to look at that. You could probably also, you could make a lot of generalizations about these things, but basically I'm saying that would pass. That would not pass. Ken's Wart. Yeah, I don't like that email address. So, all right. So whenever I'm faced with this problem, it's actually kind of a common one. I always think of it kind of the same way. So what we want to do, so I'm going to split this string in half. That's kind of sort of the first thing I'm going to do. Now this could all be done in one line, but instead let's just, I'm going to put an echo in here, which is the wrong idea, but it's going to let you know what's happening. Actually, we'll echo in a minute. So I'm going to make a temporary little variable. I don't need this, but I'm going to say it. So some variable called temp, and let's just say temp is, so if you want to rip a string in half, it's going to be str, which I'm going to call substring because that's pretty much what it is. So the thing I want to rip apart is called the string, right? I'm referring to the parameter, and the thing that I want to rip it, the string that I want to use to rip it in half is going to be that. So when I find an @ rip this thing in half. And then I want to echo out that temp. Now you shouldn't have this echo in the end, but I'm just going to show you what it does. I'm trying to introduce what the str function does. It finds the first occurrence of that and splits it around it. I know I was doing stuff here, so I did something bad. What did I do? I did something bad. Oh, I guess I have no condition there, so fine. I don't know. We'll see how that works. Yeah, that's a hack move, but if you've got something you just need to make work, an if, you can do that. So, valid email. So see what it did? It took that email address, and you can see what it did. Like, that's the thing I printed out. You see how it split it? So str took the string, it ripped it in half at the @ symbol. And so now finding that was good, but I don't actually, like the true false isn't actually based on whether it finds an @. It's more based on whether it finds a dot in the second half of the string. If that makes sense to you. So I've got this temp thing. So I'm just going to say if, and then I'm just going to do strpos. This is like index of, so this is going to tell me the index of a dot in a string. So the thing I want to look at is that temp thing. Actually, no, it's not a string. It's just a temp. And I'm looking for a dot. So here's where I rip the thing in half around the @ and now I'm looking in that second half for a dot. If that thing would return a 0 if it didn't find it, which would not be valid. So I'll just say greater than 0, which I don't need to say, but I'll say it. And if it does find something in that half, I will say return true. Now, I could have an else here and have a return false. There's nothing wrong with that because that's what it's supposed to do. The only weird thing about that is something I told you about already a few times this week is if you don't have a return value, it returns false by default. So whether you do that or not doesn't actually matter. That is actually the same thing. Because if it doesn't return true, it's going to return false. So it's all about what you want to do. Leveraging those defaults is smart. Let's see how this goes now. Pass, so it looks like it's working. So the first one passed in that it failed, which is a weird thing to say. So that first email address, that was supposed to fail, and it did. And that one passed. All right, so that was valid email. The last two are going to be print key and array to list. So I don't have test cases for these, so you're going to have to eyeball those a bit. All right, print key value. So this is going to iterate over that array, and it's going to print out the key value pairs. I actually don't remember what the instructions said. They said we are going to just do the key value pairs with line breaks. All right. Function, that thing, shell it out. Name of my function. Let's document this function. So you see, this is a weird lab in that the programming is minimal. We're more just sitting here talking about functions. So this echo, I always want to say print, but echo is the right thing here. Echo, and I also don't know how to spell echoes because that's how you spell echoes, but I don't actually mean that. I mean like a reference to the function echo. So I don't know how to write it, and feel free to not comment below because I don't actually care. but I'm just telling you, I don't know what to do there, and I don't think it matters much. I also probably don't care whether you say GIF or GIF, just on an unrelated note. All right, so echo key value pairs separated by line breaks. Param 1 is an array. No return value. You can call that a void function. And I'm really tempted. I want to write a third line where I say it echoes it, but I don't know. I think I kind of did that there. My instincts are saying, hey, this should actually probably be the third line where I say like what it does or what it returns, and but then the first line and the third line are the same, so I'm just gonna leave it. All right, so this thing accepts an R array. I always call them R. And if you want to iterate through an array, you've got a good friend for this, and that good friend's name is for each. Because you don't know how many things are in that array, this is a perfect candidate for that. Now, if we care about keys and values, it's going to be the other kind of a for each loop. And by other, I mean, so name of the array that you want to iterate over as key val. So remember, there was one where you could just access the vowels, and one where you could access the keys and the vowels. Let's use that one because we're going to do the keys and the vowels. And so all this thing does is for each pass through, it's going to echo out the key. I'm going to do a colon, or you could do a colon or a hyphen. It doesn't matter. Followed by a line break. So like what that means is, well, it's highly dependent on the array that you pass it, but in this instance we're going to pass it this array. So the first key is going to be hot dog, first key is going to be value. So it's going to print out hot dog hyphen $2 or whatever that said, and then it's going to go through and do its deal like that. So if I run this thing, it did that. Now you just got to ask yourself, does that look right? I mean, if it had like nulls in there or empty spaces, then it means you did some kind of a typo, or maybe you forgot line breaks, but I can't really test that one for you. Now, honestly, I could test it for you, I guess, but I'm not trying to write an if it has a condition that long, so you'll know if it worked or not. And the last one is this R to list. This is the most difficult one. It's also similar to a problem that you have on your homework, and so that's why I'm doing this one, so you shouldn't have too much trouble with the similar problem on your homework, because you've kind of got something to work with here if the solution isn't already something that you can get on your own. All right, so this function, it trying to think how to word this. This it convert an array into a unordered list of key value pairs. Param 1 is an array. Returns a string formatted as an HTML UL unordered list. Key value pairs are LIs. So if you're just some person watching this on the internet, I don't mean just some person. Thanks for watching. If you're some person, for some person on the internet, this is HTML. Unfortunately, we can't avoid it when we're talking about PHP for long. So those are unordered lists. Pretty fundamental thing. All right. So this is a more complex problem. So the good news is if you've checked out if you did the first PHP class, you've seen how I do things. Building up these dynamic structures is something we've done a lot of. It's the same every time. So let's define that parameter first. It's called R. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a string. And this string is going to be the thing that I'm going to return. And so I'm telling you right now that every unordered list starts with an opening UL tag. So I'm going to build this up like one line at a time. And then at the very end, what I'm going to do is I'm going to concatenate. So dot equals, that's concatenating a string. So I'm going to put on a closing unordered list tag. So I don't know how many items are in this list. That's going to be handled by repetition, but I can tell you it's going to start with an opening tag and it's going to end with a closing tag. That dot right there means we're concatenating onto it. We're not concatenating here because it's the first thing we're doing. You could do that, but it doesn't really make sense. And then from here, I'm going to do a for each loop. If you're okay with for each loops, then this isn't going to be too bad. I also need to comment this out. You know it's painful to comment your code when you're starting, but I'm telling you, the more you write, the more you're going to understand that commenting your code is a good idea. All right, so this for each loop is actually, the weird thing about it is this isn't the same thing as this, but if you're doing a for each loop where you care about the keys and the values, you're pretty much just going to write that every time. The only thing that might change is that, which would be based on the parameter, which I don't know why you would give it a different name. So anyways, I want to iterate over R as key, val, and then so this is for each pass through the array. What I want to do is I want to build up that string, so that's dot equals. I want to add something onto it, and what I want to add onto it is a list item, open, close, and inside of those list items, that's where the key val goes. I don't know if my instructions said to do something more specific than that, did they? Nope. Well, what I meant is like, did I say colon or hyphen, or I didn't say. Thank goodness. I don't care. I mean, I'm just trying to do this. So start my list. For each pass through the array, add an item. At the end of the loop, close the list. This isn't going to work right, so let's watch it not work right, because that's fun, I guess. I do this, and I don't know, right? Nothing happened. The reason nothing happened is I didn't return anything. I can't tell you how many times I've done that, right? I sit here and I do good work writing a function, working through it, debugging it, getting my logic straight, and then, oh, why didn't I get anything? Well, because I forgot to return something. So it was just returning a false, which is a 0, which doesn't do anything. Now, I get that, which I think is good. I mean, you could format it however you want. Let me show you something else, which I have talked about before. If you view the page source here, yikes. Not cool at all, right? Like if my list had problems, I would not enjoy debugging that. So something you can do when you are generating these, especially when you're doing repetition to generate output, new lines is going to make your stuff a lot more readable. So this is only for debugging purposes. You don't have to do this. I'm just saying, I think it's a good idea. So now I go over here, run the same thing. I think that just updates, yeah. You see what it does? So instead of just being one gigantic line, which you're not going to debug, because you're not... no one's going to debug a line that's like 10,000 characters long. If you can do something about it, then do something about it. So you see what that does. And sure, it wasn't the most well thought out set of line breaks, but at least you can kind of see what it did. At least it put line breaks in the code, so if there's problems, maybe I can figure it out. All right, and that's the lab. So when you're done, you're going to pass all your tests. You've got an assignment for the week, which is no more difficult than this, but hopefully you find this as a useful resource. So if you went through this and this made some sense to you, it should help you a lot with the assignment. So hope you enjoyed Lab 1. Thanks for watching.